Jake Morrison stared at the viewscreen as his small ship drifted closer to the massive alien vessel. The thing was huge, maybe 10 times the size of his exploration craft, and it spun slowly in the darkness of space like a dead whale floating in an ocean. No lights flickered on its surface, no energy readings came from their scanners, and no response came when they tried to send signals to it. "Captain, I'm not picking up any life signs," said Rita from her station. She was their medical officer and the smartest person Jake had ever met. Her fingers danced over the controls as she ran scan after scan. "But the hull is intact and there's still atmosphere inside most of the ship." Tom, their engineer, looked up from his console with worry in his eyes. "Sir, this thing is way beyond anything we've seen before. The metal isn't like anything in our databases, and those energy patterns are completely alien. Maybe we should report this to command and wait for backup." Jake rubbed his chin and thought about it. They were 3 days out from the nearest human outpost and 2 weeks from Earth. By the time backup arrived, this ship might drift away or worse, other people might find it first. The discovery of alien technology could change everything for humanity. "We go aboard," Jake decided. "But we take precautions. Full environmental suits, weapons ready, and we stay in contact at all times. Rita, you're with me. Tom, you monitor from here, and if anything goes wrong, you jump to hyperspace and get help." An hour later, Jake and Rita floated through an airlock that had opened for them like the ship was welcoming visitors. The inside of the alien vessel was nothing like human ships. The walls curved in impossible ways and seemed to be made of some kind of crystal that glowed with soft blue light. The corridors were wide enough for 3 humans to walk side by side, but the ceiling was much higher than needed, as if built for very tall beings. "Jake, look at this," Rita whispered through their comm system. She was examining one of the crystal formations that grew from the wall like frozen flowers. "These aren't just decorative. They're conducting energy somehow. The whole ship is like one giant computer made of living crystal." They moved deeper into the ship, their boots making no sound on the smooth floor. Jake noticed that everything was beautiful in a way that human ships never were. Where humans built for function, these aliens had built for art. Even their doorways were shaped like graceful arches and covered in patterns that hurt to look at too long. The corridors led them to what must have been the command center. The room was enormous and filled with crystal formations that pulsed with different colors. In the center of it all was something that looked like a throne made of the same glowing material. And sitting on that throne was the most alien thing Jake had ever seen. She was tall, much taller than any human, with 4 arms that ended in delicate hands. Her skin was translucent blue and seemed to glow from within like the crystals around her. Her face was almost human but stretched and refined, with large eyes that held depths Jake couldn't understand. She wore robes that seemed to be made of liquid starlight and a crown that floated above her head without touching. When she saw them, she stood up slowly. Jake raised his weapon, but something in her posture made him hesitate. She wasn't threatening. She looked broken. Then she did something that shocked him completely. She ran toward him with a cry that sounded like music mixed with pain and threw all 4 of her arms around him. She clung to him like a drowning person clinging to a piece of wood and began to weep. Her tears were like liquid diamonds, and they fell on his suit as she sobbed against his chest. "Captain, what do I do?" Jake asked over the comm, but Rita was too stunned to answer. The alien woman was speaking in a language that sounded like singing, but suddenly Jake began to understand her words. Not hear them, but understand them directly in his mind. Images flooded his thoughts. Dying worlds, crystal cities going dark, billions of people falling ill with something that turned their skin gray and their eyes empty. "Please," she said inside his head, and her mental voice was filled with such desperate hope that it made his heart ache. "Please, you have to help us. You're the answer we've been looking for. I've searched for so long, so very long, and finally you're here." Jake tried to step back, but she held on to him tighter. Through their mental connection, he could feel her emotions. Centuries of loneliness, the weight of responsibility for billions of lives, and a fear so deep it made him shiver. But underneath it all was hope, burning bright and desperate. "Who are you?" Jake managed to ask. "I am Lyra," she replied, both out loud and in his mind. "Queen of the Vextai Empire, ruler of 1,000 worlds, and the last hope of my people. And you, human, are the miracle I have spent 300 years searching for." Rita finally found her voice. Jake, her biosigns are off the charts. Whatever she is, she's not fully organic. Part of her is crystalline, like the ship. Lyra pulled back just enough to look at Jake's face through his helmet. Her large eyes were filled with tears and something like worship. Your people call you human, yes? You come from the small blue world on the edge of this galaxy. Earth, Jake nodded, still trying to process what was happening. How do you know about Earth? I have been searching, Lyra said, and new images filled his mind. He saw her ship traveling from star to star, scanning planets, studying species after species. My people are dying of a plague that our greatest minds cannot cure. Our crystal hearts are failing, and with them, our entire civilization. But the ancient texts spoke of a young race that would hold the key to our salvation. She pressed her forehead against his helmet, and Jake felt a warm tingling sensation throughout his body. The crystal formations around the room suddenly blazed brighter, and Lyra gasped. It's true, she whispered. The prophecy is true. Your life energy is healing my ship. Just being near you is making the crystal networks stronger. You are the cure we have been seeking. Jake looked around and saw that she was right. The crystals that had been dim and flickering were now glowing steadily. The patterns on the walls were moving faster, and the whole ship seemed to hum with renewed energy. I don't understand, Jake said. Neither do I, Lyra admitted, still clinging to him. But I know that without you, my people will die. All of them. Every world in our empire will go dark, and a civilization that has existed for 10,000 years will end. That is why I weep, human Jake Morrison. Not from sadness alone, but from relief. Finally, after so long, there is hope. Jake sat in what Lyra called the memory chamber while she showed him the history of her people. The room was filled with floating crystals that projected images directly into his mind, and each image was more incredible than the last. He saw the Vextai Empire at its peak, crystal cities that reached into the clouds, ships that could travel between galaxies, and technology that seemed like magic to his human understanding. We were not always wise, Lyra said as she stood beside him, her 4 hands moving to control the crystal displays. Long ago, my ancestors conquered worlds and enslaved lesser species. We believed that our advanced civilization gave us the right to rule over others. The images changed to show great battles in space and the subjugation of primitive worlds. Jake saw species that looked almost human being forced to work in crystal mines, and others being used as test subjects for Vextai experiments. It was ugly, and it made him uncomfortable. But conquest brings its own punishment, Lyra continued, and her voice carried the weight of centuries. The more worlds we controlled, the more rebellions we faced. The more species we enslaved, the more enemies we made. And then the plague came. New images filled the chamber, Vextai cities going dark, their crystal hearts failing one by one. Jake watched as the beautiful glowing beings began to turn gray and lifeless, their connection to the crystal networks that powered their civilization slowly dying. It started on our conquered worlds first, Lyra explained. We thought it was sabotage by our enemies, some kind of weapon designed to destroy our technology. But then it spread to our home worlds, and we realized the truth. This was not an attack from outside. This was our own crystals failing, as if they had grown tired of sustaining us. Jake studied the images more carefully. How long ago did this start? 312 years, Lyra replied immediately. I became queen when I was barely an adult because the plague had killed my parents and most of the royal family. I inherited an empire of dying worlds and a people who looked to me for salvation. She waved her hand, and the images changed to show her younger self, standing alone in the same throne room where Jake had found her. Even then, centuries ago, she had looked tired and afraid. I tried everything, she said. I assembled the greatest minds of our empire and tasked them with finding a cure. I sent expeditions to every corner of the galaxy looking for answers. I even freed all of our enslaved peoples and begged their forgiveness, hoping that their hatred was somehow causing our crystals to fail. Did that help? Jake asked. It was the right thing to do, Lyra replied, but it did not stop the plague. If anything, it made things worse because we lost the resources those worlds provided. Many of my advisors said I was a fool, that I had doomed our people by giving up our conquests. She showed him images of massive Vex-TIE fleets abandoning their outposts and retreating to their core worlds. Planets that had been under Vex-TIE control for thousands of years were suddenly free, but the empire that had ruled them was crumbling from within. As the years passed, more and more worlds went dark, Lyra continued. We had to evacuate entire systems as their crystal networks failed. My people became refugees in their own empire, fleeing from world to world as the plague spread. Jake saw the Great Exodus, massive ships filled with Vex-TIE civilians fleeing their dying homeworlds, searching for places where the crystal networks still functioned. But even those safe havens were temporary. The plague followed them everywhere. How many are left? Jake asked quietly. Lyra was silent for a long moment. Of the billion worlds that once made up our empire, fewer than 1,000 remain habitable. Of the trillions of Vex-TIE who once lived, perhaps a few million survive. And every day, more crystal hearts fail. She showed him the current state of her empire, scattered worlds connected by failing networks, populations living in fear as they watched their technology slowly die around them. The great crystal cities were mostly empty now, their inhabitants evacuated to the few remaining stable worlds. This ship, Lyra said, gesturing to the chamber around them, is all that remains of the Imperial fleet. I sent the others away years ago to prevent the plague from spreading faster. I have been alone for so long, searching for the answer that our scientists promised must exist. What made you think humans were the answer? Jake asked. Lyra walked to one of the larger crystals and placed her hands on its surface. Images flowed from it, ancient Vex-TIE texts covered in symbols that looked like mathematical equations mixed with poetry. In our oldest records, written before we became conquerors, there are prophecies about the end times, she explained. They speak of a young race that will emerge when our empire faces its darkest hour. A species that seems primitive but carries within them the key to renewal. She translated the ancient writing for him. From the smallest seed comes the mightiest tree. From the youngest species comes the oldest wisdom. When the crystal hearts grow cold and the light begins to fade, seek the ones who burn with the fire of beginnings. It's pretty vague, Jake pointed out. All prophecies are, Lyra agreed, but there were more specific clues. The texts described a species that had only recently developed space travel, one that lived on a world mostly covered by water, one that had never conquered other planets but instead fought among themselves. Jake had to admit that sounded like humanity. So you've been searching for us? For the last 50 years, yes, Lyra nodded. I followed every lead, investigated every young species I could find. I have seen 1,000 different worlds and met countless alien races, but none of them had the effect on our crystals that you do. She gestured around the chamber and Jake could see that she was right. The crystal formations were brighter than they had been when he first arrived, their light steadier and more vibrant. Just his presence was somehow healing the ancient technology. Why me specifically? Jake asked. I don't know, Lyra admitted. Perhaps it is not you specifically, but all humans. Or perhaps you were simply the first one I found. But Jake Morrison, when I felt your ship enter this system and sensed the life energy radiating from it, I knew my search was over. She turned to face him fully and Jake could see the exhaustion in her eyes. 3 centuries of responsibility, of watching her people die while she searched desperately for a solution, had worn her down to almost nothing. I am tired, she said simply. So very tired of carrying this burden alone. Of making decisions that affect the survival of my entire species. Of watching worlds go dark and knowing that I have failed them. You haven't failed, Jake said. You found us, didn't you? Perhaps, Lyra replied, but finding you is only the beginning. The real question is whether you and your people will help us, or whether humanity will do what every other species would do when they discover that they hold power over the fate of an empire. Jake thought about that. Throughout history, whenever one group had power over another, the results were rarely good. But maybe, just maybe, humans could be different. Rita worked for 16 hours straight while Jake stayed with Lyra in the medical bay. The alien queen lay on a bed that had grown from the crystal floor itself, her translucent skin glowing weakly as Rita ran test after test. Every few minutes, Rita would mutter something under her breath and run another scan. This is impossible, Rita finally said, pulling off her gloves and looking at the data on her portable screens. Jake, come look at this. Jake moved closer while Lyra watched them both with curious eyes. She had been patient throughout the entire examination, answering questions and allowing Rita to take samples of her blood, which turned out to be more like liquid crystal than anything biological. "What am I looking at?" Jake asked, staring at the complex readouts that meant nothing to him. "Queen Lyra isn't entirely organic," Rita explained. "About 60% of her body is made up of the same crystal structures that power this ship. Her heart, her nervous system, even parts of her brain are crystalline. It's like she's part biological being and part living computer." "All Vextai are this way," Lyra said softly. "We evolved alongside our crystal technology over millions of years. We are not separate from our machines. We are one with them." Rita nodded. "That's why the plague is so devastating. It's not just destroying their technology, it's destroying them physically. The crystal parts of their bodies are breaking down." She pulled up another screen showing molecular structures that looked like twisted DNA. "But here's the really interesting part. When Jake touches Queen Lyra, her crystal structures stabilize. Look at these readings." Jake studied the before and after scans. Even to his untrained eye, he could see the difference. Where the crystal formations had been chaotic and breaking apart, they were now organized and strong. "How is that possible?" Jake asked. "I've been trying to figure that out all day," Rita said, running her hands through her hair. "At first I thought it might be some kind of electromagnetic field that humans produce, but the effect is too specific. Then I considered biochemical reactions, but we're talking about crystal structures, not organic chemistry." She paused and looked at both of them. "I think it's quantum-level healing. Humans produce a very specific type of bioelectric field that interacts with quantum structures in ways we don't fully understand. The crystals are suffering from quantum decay, and human proximity somehow reverses that process." "You're saying humans can heal their technology just by being near it?" Jake asked. "Not heal exactly," Rita corrected. "More like stabilize. Think of it like this. The Vextai crystals are like a house of cards that's falling down. Human bioelectric fields act like a gentle wind that keeps the cards from falling." Lyra sat up on the bed, her eyes bright with hope. "This means all humans can do this? Not just Jake?" "Theoretically, yes," Rita nodded. "Though I'd need to test it to be sure. The effect seems to be stronger with direct contact, but even Jake just being in the same room has improved the crystal networks throughout this entire ship." Jake looked around and realized she was right. The walls were glowing more brightly than when they had first arrived, and the patterns of light that moved through the crystal formations were faster and more complex. "There's something else," Rita continued, pulling up a new set of readings. "The effect gets stronger the longer a human is in contact with the crystals. After just a few hours with Jake nearby, Queen Lyra's biological functions have improved dramatically. Her crystal heart is beating stronger, her neural pathways are more active, and her overall health readings are the best they've been in decades." "How many humans would it take to heal an entire world?" Lyra asked quietly. Rita did some quick calculations on her portable computer. "Based on what I'm seeing here, maybe a few hundred humans could stabilize the crystal networks for a planet-sized city. A few thousand could probably restore an entire world to full function." The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. "You're talking about asking thousands of humans to leave Earth and live on alien worlds." "Not necessarily permanently," Rita said. "The stabilization effect seems to have some lasting impact. Even if humans only visited periodically, it might be enough to keep the crystal networks functioning." Lyra slid off the bed and walked to the wall, placing all four of her hands on the crystal surface. Through the network, Jake could sense her reaching out to other surviving Vextai worlds, sharing the news of their discovery. "My people are dying," she said without turning around. "Every day we lose more crystal networks, more cities, more lives. If there is even a chance that humanity can help us, I have to ask." "What exactly are you asking?" Jake said carefully. Lyra turned to face him, and for the first time since he had met her, she looked like the queen she claimed to be. Her spine was straight, her voice was strong, and her eyes burned with determination. "I am asking for a partnership," she said. "Not conquest, not slavery, not tribute. A true partnership between our peoples. Humans would help us maintain our crystal networks, and in return, we would share our technology and knowledge with humanity." She gestured around the medical bay. We have mastered faster-than-light travel, energy manipulation, terraforming, life extension, and technologies that your species has not even dreamed of yet. We could make humanity one of the most advanced species in the galaxy. In exchange for being your permanent repair crew? Jake asked. In exchange for saving us from extinction, Lyra replied. But Jake Morrison, I want you to understand what I am truly offering. We have mapped millions of worlds suitable for human colonization. We could give your species an empire that spans thousands of star systems. Rita looked up from her equipment. Jake, the medical applications alone would revolutionize human healthcare. Their crystal technology could cure diseases we don't even have treatments for yet. And the risks? Jake asked. Lyra was quiet for a moment. The risk is that your people would become essential to our survival, and we to yours. Our civilizations would be bound together permanently. There would be no going back to the way things were. There's another risk, Rita added quietly. If the quantum field theory is correct, humans who spend too much time around the crystals might start to change. The bioelectric interaction could work both ways. Change how? Jake asked. I don't know, Rita admitted. Maybe nothing significant. Maybe humans would develop some of the same quantum sensing abilities that the Vextai have. Maybe our lifespans would increase to match theirs. Maybe something else entirely. Jake looked at Lyra. How long do your people live? Several thousand years, she replied. Though I am still considered young at only 500. The communication with Earth Command took 3 days and Jake barely slept during any of them. He sat in the ship's communication center while Lyra waited nearby, her 4 hands clasped together as she listened to him argue with admirals and politicians across the vastness of space. You want us to send how many humans to alien worlds? Admiral Hayes' voice crackled through the hyperspace transmitter. Morrison, do you understand what you're asking? This could change the entire future of our species. It could save another species from extinction, Jake replied, glancing at Lyra. And it could advance human civilization by thousands of years overnight. Or it could be the end of human independence, came another voice, this one from the Colonial Council. How do we know this isn't some elaborate trap? How do we know these aliens won't use humans as slaves once they get us on their worlds? Lyra leaned forward. May I speak to them? Jake nodded and activated the visual transmitter. The image of Lyra appeared on screens across Earth's government centers, and Jake heard several people gasp at their first sight of an actual alien. Leaders of humanity, Lyra began, her voice carrying the authority of centuries of rule. I am Queen Lyra of the Vextai Empire. I understand your suspicions because my own people were once conquerors. We enslaved other species and believed ourselves superior to all others. She paused, letting her words sink in. But conquest brought us nothing but enemies and isolation. The plague that now destroys us may well be the universe's punishment for our past crimes. I will not repeat those mistakes with humanity. Pretty words, Admiral Hayes replied. But how can we trust you? Because I am offering you equality, not servitude, Lyra said. Your people would be partners in rebuilding our civilization, not workers or slaves. And because I am willing to offer something no conqueror would ever give, complete access to our technology, including our weapons. That caused a stir on the other end of the transmission. Jake could hear multiple voices arguing in the background. You would give us your military secrets? Someone asked. All of them, Lyra confirmed. Your scientists would have access to our entire database of knowledge. Our weapons, our ships, our medical technology, our terraforming capabilities. Everything we have learned over 10,000 years would belong to humanity as well. Jake spoke up. She's also offering us worlds, thousands of them. Habitable planets that humans could colonize and call their own. The arguments on Earth continued for hours. Some voices called for immediate acceptance while others demanded more time to study the proposal. Some wanted guarantees that Lyra couldn't possibly give, while others worried about the moral implications of letting an entire species die. Finally, Admiral Hayes spoke directly to Jake. Morrison, what's your recommendation? You've been with this alien queen for days now. What do you think? Jake looked at Lyra, who had remained patient throughout the entire debate. He thought about everything he had learned about her people, about their history of conquest and their current desperation. "I think we should help them," Jake said. "Not just because of what we'll gain, but because it's the right thing to do. Yes, there are risks, but there are risks in everything. And if we say no, we'll be responsible for the death of an entire civilization." "The Council will need to vote," Admiral Hayes said. "That could take weeks." "People are dying while you debate," Lyra said quietly. "Every day my crystal networks fail and more of my people lose their lives. I do not blame you for being cautious, but please understand that time is not something I have in abundance." After the transmission ended, Jake found Lyra standing alone in the observation deck, looking out at the stars. Her translucent skin seemed dimmer than usual and her shoulders were slumped with exhaustion. "They're afraid," Jake said, joining her at the window. "As they should be," Lyra replied. "I am asking them to trust a species they have never met, to make a commitment that will affect generations of humans yet unborn. If I were in their position, I would be afraid too." Jake studied her profile. "What will you do if they say no?" "Continue searching," Lyra said. "There are other young species in the galaxy, other possibilities. Though I confess, none have shown the same compatibility with our crystal technology that humans have." "And if you can't find anyone else?" Lyra was quiet for a long moment. "Then my people will die with dignity, knowing that we tried everything. At least our final years will not be spent as conquerors but as a people who learned wisdom too late." Something in her tone made Jake turn to face her fully. "You don't think you'll find another solution, do you?" "Humanity is our last hope," Lyra admitted. "I have searched for 50 years and found nothing else that works. If your people refuse to help us, then the Vextai Empire will end with me." Jake felt the weight of that responsibility settle on his shoulders. An entire species, billions of lives, depending on a decision made by people who had never seen an alien, never understood the scope of the galaxy, never felt the desperate hope that radiated from Lyra's every word. "I could go with you," Jake said suddenly. Lyra turned to him in surprise. "What?" "While Earth decides what to do officially, I could come with you to one of your worlds," Jake explained. "Rita proved that my presence helps your crystal networks. Maybe I can't save your entire empire, but I could help stabilize one world, buy you more time." "Jake Morrison," Lyra said, her voice filled with emotion, "that would mean leaving your own people, possibly forever. The journey to my homeworld would take months, and there would be no guarantee that you could return to Earth." "Someone has to take the first step," Jake replied. "Someone has to show that this partnership can work. Maybe if Earth sees that one human can make a difference, they'll be more willing to send others." Lyra reached out and touched his face gently with one of her hands. Through the contact, Jake could feel her emotions: gratitude, hope, and something deeper that he couldn't quite identify. "You would sacrifice your life among your own people to help mine?" she asked. "I'm not sacrificing anything," Jake said. "I'm choosing to help. There's a difference." Lyra closed her eyes and leaned against him, and Jake could feel the warmth radiating from her crystal-enhanced physiology. "In all my centuries of life, I have met few beings with such courage. Your species may be young, but you have hearts that shame those of us who have lived for millennia." "Is that a yes?" Jake asked. Lyra pulled back to look at him. "It is a yes, but only if you are certain. Once we begin the journey to my homeworld, there will be no turning back. You will be the first human to see the heart of the Vextai Empire, to walk on worlds that have existed for millions of years. And to help save them," Jake added. "And to help save them," Lyra agreed. 2 days later, Jake stood in the docking bay as Tom prepared to return to Earth with the recorded logs and data from their encounter. Rita had decided to stay and monitor the effects of human presence on Vextai crystal technology. "You sure about this, Captain?" Tom asked as he sealed his environmental suit. "I'm sure," Jake replied. "Tell Earth Command that we're buying them time to make the right decision. And Tom, make sure they understand what's at stake here." As Tom's ship disappeared into hyperspace, Jake felt Lyra's hand on his shoulder. "Are you ready to see what remains of my empire?" she asked. Jake nodded and followed her to the bridge of her vessel. As they activated the faster-than-light drive, he wondered what he would find on her homeworld and whether one human could really make a difference in the fate of an ancient civilization. But as the stars blurred around them and Lyra's crystal networks hummed with renewed energy, Jake began to believe that maybe, just maybe, humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their weapons. Maybe it was their willingness to help strangers, even when the cost was everything they had ever known. The Vextai homeworld was dying when Jake first saw it from orbit. What should have been a gleaming jewel of crystal cities was instead a planet of flickering lights and darkened continents. Massive crystal formations that once reached into the atmosphere now stood cracked and dim, and whole sections of the world's surface showed no energy signatures at all. "It was not always like this," Lyra said quietly as she piloted her ship toward the largest remaining city. "When I was young, our homeworld blazed with light that could be seen from a dozen star systems away. Now look at it." Jake studied the approaching city through the viewscreen. Even in its weakened state, it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Towers of living crystal twisted toward the sky in impossible spirals, connected by bridges of solid light that pulsed with data streams. But many of the towers were dark, their crystalline hearts cold and lifeless. As their ship descended through the atmosphere, Jake could see Vextai people in the streets below. They moved slowly, as if each step cost them great effort, and their skin had the gray tinge that marked advanced crystal decay. Many wore robes that had once glowed with inner light but now hung dim and lifeless around their tall frames. "How many live here now?" Jake asked. "Perhaps 50,000, Lyra replied. "Once, this city alone housed 10 million. Most have fled to our few remaining stable worlds, but some chose to stay and die where they were born." The ship landed in what had been the royal spaceport, though only a few other vessels remained. As Jake and Lyra walked down the landing ramp, Jake felt something extraordinary happen. The crystal formations around the spaceport, which had been flickering weakly, suddenly blazed with renewed light. The change rippled outward like a wave, and Jake could see the light spreading through the city's crystal network. "By the Ancient Ones," whispered an elderly Vextai who had come to meet them. His 4 arms trembled as he approached, and his eyes were wide with disbelief. "My queen, what have you brought to us?" "Hope," Lyra replied simply. "Lord Kane, this is Jake Morrison of the human species." "Jake, this is Lord Kane, keeper of the Royal Archives and one of my oldest advisors." Lord Kane knelt before Jake, all 4 hands pressed to the ground. "Savior," he said in heavily accented English. "The networks sing with life again. Already I can feel the crystal hearts responding to your presence." Jake felt uncomfortable with the display of worship. "Please stand up. I'm just here to help." As word of Jake's arrival spread through the city, more Vextai gathered in the streets. They watched in amazement as the crystal networks grew brighter and stronger with each passing hour. Buildings that had been dark for decades suddenly blazed with light, and the connecting bridges between towers began pulsing with data streams once again. Rita, who had been monitoring Jake's effect on the ship systems during their journey, ran constant scans with her portable equipment. "Jake, this is incredible. Your bioelectric field is affecting crystal formations across the entire city. The quantum stabilization effect is propagating through their network faster than I thought possible." Over the next few days, Jake walked through every district of the great city. Everywhere he went, the crystal hearts came back to life. Vextai, who had been near death from crystal decay, began to recover as the networks they depended on grew stable again. The gray tinge faded from their skin and the light returned to their eyes. "It's working," Lyra said as they stood on a balcony overlooking the city. Below them, crystal spires glowed with steady light and the streets were filled with Vextai who moved with renewed energy. "One human has brought back to life a city that was